I still remember the night my little girl dragged me into a restaurant. I had no business walking into the kind of place with valets in suits and a wine list thicker than my paycheck. And there I was in a clearance rack dress with a 4-year-old in a pink tutu glued to my side like she owned the place. The hostess kept glancing at us through the glass like we were definitely lost, and every tired voice in my head was saying, "Turn around, go home, microwave some nuggets and stay in your lane." But Rosie just looked up at me with those glitter clips in her hair and said, "Mom, let's go, you already put on lipstick." And honestly, she had a point. This was the blind date my best friend Nina had bullied me into some guy named Logan. She swore was decent, and when my babysitter canceled 2 hours before the reservation, I told Nina, "Well, guess that's that." And she laughed and said, "Bring Rosie." I told him, "You're a single mom. If he can't handle your real life, he doesn't deserve a date." So now my heart was pounding while my 4-year-old marched us into a place called the Sterling Room, like it was Applebee's. Inside, the air had that expensive hush, the jazz was low, the lighting gentle, and my daughter's light-up sneakers flashed with every step, like tiny protest signs. And I could feel people doing that quick once-over, measuring our Target outfits against their designer ones. The hostess approached with her professional smile and asked if we had a reservation, clearly expecting me to say no. And when I said yes under Logan Pierce, everything about her softened. Suddenly it was, "Of course, right this way." And I went from "you must be lost" to "ma'am" in one last name. We wove between tables, and then I saw him by the window, city lights behind him, dark hair, gray suit that actually fit the kind of watch you only see in airport ads. And my first thought was, Nina has lost her mind. This man is way out of my league. Then I saw the kid. Next to him sat a little boy in a tiny vest and button-down, carefully cutting his chicken with his tongue, poking out in concentration, a miniature version of the man beside him. And something in my chest unclenched, because at least I wasn't the only one who had brought a +1 under 4 feet tall. Logan stood up as soon as he saw us walked around the table with this slightly nervous but genuine smile and said, "Emma, I'm really glad you came." And instead of staring at my dress or my cheap purse, he crouched down to Rosie's level and asked, "And who is this?" like she was the important one. Rosie, being Rosie, went all in. "I'm 4.5, this is a fancy place, and my mom put on lipstick for you." And yeah, that came out of her actual mouth. I wanted the floor to swallow me, and he just laughed, real laughter that crinkled the corners of his eyes. He introduced his son. "This is Theo." And the boy said very seriously, "I'm 5 3/4. And Rosie gasped and whispered, "3/4 is very important." And that was it. They slid their chairs together, started whispering about cartoons and dessert, and our table suddenly sounded like life in the middle of all that quiet. If you're a single parent, you know you walk into every room rehearsing your apology for the noise, the mess, the fact that your kid exists. So when I opened the menu and saw there were no prices printed, I could hear my bank account flatline. And I was already planning to say, "Just a salad." But Logan caught my face and said softly, "Tonight's on me. Emma, really order what you and Rosie want." "I'm just glad you came," Nina said. "Your sitter canceled." And I swear my shoulders dropped a full inch. Somewhere between the bread and the main course, the small talk slid into real talk. He told me he ran a logistics software company, then translated it into, "I help trucks not get lost." And we laughed, and then he mentioned his wife, and his voice shifted. "She passed away 3 years ago, cancer, it was fast." And the restaurant faded to background noise while he explained that Theo had been barely 3, that he remembers her in flashes, that they still talk about her every night. When he asked about my story, I skipped the glossy version and told him how my ex Tyler walked out when Rosie was 6 months old, said he felt trapped, said he wasn't cut out to be a dad, packed a bag, and left us standing in the doorway. How some people still tilt their heads when they hear single mom. like it's a hobby. Logan didn't ask what I did wrong, didn't say, well, relationships are complicated. He just shook his head and said, that's on him, he walked away from his kid. That's his failure, not yours. And I didn't realize how much I'd been waiting to hear those words until they were there between us. Because life likes drama, the table behind us had front row seats. He was in a navy blazer, she had a diamond doing its own light show, and they'd been throwing us little looks since Rosie's sneakers started flashing. When she dropped her spoon and giggled at the clang, the woman snapped her fingers for a server and said, is this a daycare now? Loud enough for everyone in a 20-foot radius. My body went into autopilot. I turned to apologize, to offer to keep Rosie quieter, or even leave, but before I could shrink back into my chair, Logan set his hand flat on the table and said in this calm, firm tone, ma'am, if you'd like a quieter table, I'm sure they can move you, but our kids are sitting down and using their inside voices and they're allowed to exist in public. And I watched the man in the blazer roll his eyes and mutter something about coupons. Every old bit of shame I carried tried to climb up my throat, and for the first time I didn't swallow it. I looked right at her and said, there isn't a sign that says no children, right? Because if there is, I'd love to see it. And she gave me that look people give when they think they're better than you, but the hostess swooped in and ended up moving them, not us. When they finally left, Logan leaned over and whispered, you handled that so well you didn't need me to step in. And it hit me how rarely I'd heard anything like that from a man, not, you're too loud, not calm down, just you stood up and I'm proud of you. That dinner could have been a one-time story I told for laughs later, but it turned into coffee at the park while the kids argued over the swings, turned into museum Saturdays, where Theo carefully showed Rosie how to draw trains, while Logan and I stood off to the side sharing a pretzel and trading that exhausted look parents give each other, the one that says, yeah, me too, you know what I mean. He came over to my cramped apartment with its thrift store couch and noisy fridge and sat on the floor building block towers like he hadn't grown up around marble counters. And then I went to his place with the high ceilings and quiet and saw the little cardboard box in his pantry, labeled Mom's Recipes, and the framed photo of his late wife in the hallway. And I realized I wasn't walking into a blank page, I was being written into a story that had cracked once already. One night, Theo padded down the hallway, clutching his stuffed train, and asked if I could read his bedtime story, because you do the funny voices. And after I tucked him in, I stood staring at that photo and blurted out to Logan, I don't want to replace her. And he leaned against the wall and said, you couldn't if you tried. She'll always be his mom. You don't have to be less for her to still matter. There's room for both. And that sentence alone loosened guilt I didn't even know how to name. Fast forward about a year from that first night at the Sterling Room, and we had become this messy little unit, 2 adults, 2 kids, 2 apartments, shared holidays, and group texts about lost lunchboxes and spirit days. It wasn't smooth. There were tantrums and jealousy, and nights when Rosie whispered, I miss when it was just us. And moments when Theo went quiet, because his dad hugged me and grief doesn't always like company. But there were also mornings when they sat at the table drawing on the same piece of paper, trains and unicorns crashing into each other. And for the first time since Tyler left, I didn't feel like I was treading water. Then came the twist that forced me to decide what kind of family we actually were. It was Theo's 7th birthday. Logan had rented this greenhouse space at the Botanical Gardens. There were train balloons, a frosting-heavy cake, kids running between potted trees, grandparents hovering with cameras. And I was doing what moms always do at parties, refilling juice, counting heads, wiping mystery stickiness off the table when I looked up and saw a familiar shape through the glass doors, hands in his pockets like he'd just wandered over from the parking lot. Tyler. My chest went cold in that instant. The same man who hadn't managed consistent child support, who sent lazy, happy birthday texts hours late, if at all, was suddenly standing 10 feet away from the life I'd clawed together without him. I slipped outside before the kids could see him and said, "What are you doing here?" And he shrugged and nodded toward the party inside and said he'd seen it on my sister's social media and thought he'd stop by and see his kid, like fatherhood was something you could drop in on between errands. Then he glanced past me at the decorations and the food and said, "Wow, botanical gardens, rich boyfriend, must be nice. You really traded up. And if you've ever had someone throw your own progress in your face, you know exactly how that burned." He said he wanted to be involved now that he'd grown up, that he could help, and then he went for the softest spot. "Do you really want our daughter calling some other guy dad?" And even though I knew exactly how many nights he'd chosen freedom over bedtime stories, the question still punched me because there is a tiny, loyal part of you that hears dad and remembers the man you thought he might become. Before I could answer, the door behind me opened and Logan stepped out. Looked at my face first, then at Tyler, and introduced himself. "I'm Logan," and Tyler shot back. "I'm her father," like a challenge. Logan didn't puff up or raise his voice, he just said, "I'm the one who's been here, who knows her teacher's name, who packs her lunch and reads her bedtime stories. No one is trying to erase you, but you're the one who stepped out." And the space between them felt like it was buzzing. They both turned to me then, like I was the judge, and that was the real turning point, more than any fancy dinner or pretty ring. I could let guilt and DNA make the call, or I could protect the little girl who had once tugged my hand and dragged me toward a better life. So I told Tyler as calmly as I could that if he truly wanted to be in Rosie's life, it wasn't going to start with surprise appearances at parties he'd found online. It would start with apologies, with consistency, with actual work on himself, with slow visits that were about her, not his ego. And until then, I wasn't letting him blow in and out whenever he felt lonely. He stared at me like I was a stranger and said, "You've changed." And I said, "Yeah, I had to," and watched him walk away past the roses. My heart was still thudding when I turned back toward the greenhouse, and that's when Logan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box and actually shaking and said, "I know the timing is crazy. It's Theo's birthday and your ex just showed up, but I was going to ask you this today anyway, because this isn't just about you and me, it's about them too." And he opened it, and there was this simple, beautiful ring, not flashy, just solid. And he said, "I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow. I'm asking if you'll say yes to a future, to this family, to showing up for each other, even when it's messy and loud and complicated." And through the glass, I could see Theo and Rosie pressed against the door, trying to read our faces. I thought about standing outside that fancy restaurant in my cheap dress, ready to run, because I didn't feel like I belonged. And I thought about the woman who had just told the father of her child that no was an option. And for the first time, it felt like saying yes to him was also saying yes to myself. So I said yes. The kids exploded through the door a second later, wrapping themselves around our legs, asking if this meant sleepovers all the time, and if they were real brother and sister now. And Logan laughed, eyes shiny, and said, "It means we're a family, and we'll figure the rest out." And standing there with train balloons bobbing over our heads, frosting on my sleeve and a ring on my finger, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not just loved, but safe. So now I want to ask you, because I know some of you watching have been the single parent, or the new partner, or the kid in the middle, and you've got your own scars and opinions, you know what I mean. If you were me, would you have let my ex into that party? Do you think I was too harsh? Drawing that line, do you believe blood automatically earns a second chance, or does showing up day after day matter more than DNA? And how do you feel about a new partner stepping into a dad or mom role when the original one is still technically around? Drop your thoughts in the comments, argue with me, Tell me where you think I got it right or wrong. Share your own stories of messy families and hard boundaries. And if any part of this story hit you in the gut, hit like, subscribe. Send it to someone who needs a reminder that they're allowed to want more than survival, and to walk into rooms nobody saved a seat for them in, and still build something that finally feels like home.